A brittle northerly wind swept the shingle beach of Wrangel Island, rattling sun-bleached whale bones like loose drumsticks on a metal rim. Far offshore, the Chukchi Sea lay gray and sluggish, its swells stamped flat by the season's first pans of new ice. But a single gutted leviathan still rocked gently in the shallows, an adult bowhead flensed almost to the spine, yet massive enough to dwarf the pickup-sized rocks around it. The carcass was 5 days old, already split along the ventral seam, ribs jutting like cathedral beams, blubber sloughing away in sheets the color of rose quartz, and all around it, packed shoulder to shoulder until the entire cove quivered with slow breathing, milled an army of polar bears, more bears than most field biologists see in a decade, each one streaked crimson from muzzle to chest, each one unwilling to surrender even a mouthful of rancid fat. At dawn, a field tech named Eli Porter launched the drone from a fingertip of tundra 50 meters above the beach. The rotor hum traveled nowhere in that thin, briny air. The bears below paid it no attention. Porter eased the craft into a rising spiral, climbing to 40 meters, then 60, adjusting the gimbal for a high oblique view. The live feed bled across his headset, white forms seething against lusterless sand, like salt shaken onto wet asphalt and set in motion by some giant magnet. A digital counter in the corner tallied detections, 47, 52, 58, and finally 60 distinct heat signatures, more than anyone on the island had ever documented in one shot. From altitude, the bears looked almost choreographed. The largest males occupied the whale's midship section, raking 4-inch claws through blubber that congealed the instant it hit the air. Each heave tore loose hunks the size of carry-on luggage. Subadult males hovered like pickpockets at the periphery, rolling shards of skin between their paws, slurping marrow soup from shattered vertebrae. Females with yearlings formed satellite rings 10 meters farther out, noses lifted, gauging when a lull might let them dart inside. Cubs no bigger than Labradors tumbled in the gravel, smeared with grease, occasionally dashing in to steal a ribbon of tendon before retreating under their mothers' bellies. Every few minutes, a dominant boar rose to full height, swung his head, and roared, an acoustic hammer that flattened every smaller bear in a 40-foot arc. But hunger has a half-life of its own. Within seconds, the subordinate tide crept forward again. Porter toggled the drone's thermal overlay. The LCD exploded into oranges and reds, each bear a furnace at 40 degrees Celsius against a landscape scarcely above freezing. But what transfixed him were the heat plumes rising from the carcass itself. Pockets of fermentation generating their own weather system. That upward draft, laden with the perfume of lipids and decay, had telegraphed across sea ice fractals and frost hummocks, summoning bears from a catchment that might span thousands of square miles. In lean years, Wrangel acts as a refuge. Its gravel flats hold the buried bones of dozens of stranded whales. And every autumn a graveyard of fresh giants washes against its coves. But 60 apex predators in one camera frame? That edged from uncommon into something approaching myth. Biologist Tatiana Doroshenko crouched beside Porter, eyes glued to the tablet mirroring his feed. She had spent 2 summers mapping den sites on Wrangel, logging maybe 100 individual bears in total. But always in dribs. Lone males patrolling ridges, sow and cub pairs skirting meltwater lagoons. The congregation on her screen looked less like isolated monarchs of ice and more like a single pulsing organism. "They've switched to whale economy early," she murmured, toggling a note on her digi-slate. "Sea ice pulled offshore before August. No seals, no pack routes. This is fallback protein." Porter nodded but said nothing. The footage required no commentary. One young male, fresh scars crosshatching his rump, lunged into a gap between 2 fatter boars, seized a gobbet of kidney fat, and spun away, hind paws skidding on kelp-slick stones. Another bear chased, jaws clacking shut on empty air. Droplets of gore arced rainbow bright in the oblique sun. Yet even this violence felt throttled, as though collective instinct recognized that excess fighting could squander the single shared jackpot. The abundance of whale flesh bought truce, uneasy, timed to the slow clock of decomposition, but truce all the same. The drone banked inland, tracing the arc of paw prints radiating from the kill like spokes on a wheel. Some trails stretched beyond visible range, implying a chain of arrivals that might still be unspooling. Doroshenko's radio crackled. A lookout on the northern plateau counted 3 more silhouettes pacing the ridge. Sniffing downslope, she logged the intel. 63 bears and climbing. For an ecologist, a super-aggregation like this is candy and curse. Candy, because each individual offers a data point, body mass index. Cortisol proxies gleaned from fur swabs. Isotope ratios revealing last season's prey mix. Curse, because the phenomenon spotlights a food web collapsed to a single node. In a stable Arctic, bowhead carcasses were lottery tickets distributed across thousands of kilometers of pack. Most bears survived the summer on ringed seals nabbed from breathing holes. Ocean warming, though, had severed hunting platforms earlier each year. Caloric math drove bears shoreward, increasingly to Wrangel's whale graveyards. The island's marine biologists knew the ledger, as whale deaths from ship strikes and entanglements rose. Beach carcasses rose, so did bear numbers, until the point when bones were picked clean by December, leaving hundreds of white giants marooned on a snowless desert, waiting for ice that now arrived months late, if at all. The film pauses on a wide zenith shot, 60 bears encircling a whale skeleton whose vertebrae gleam like wet marble. The carcass, previously 5 meters thick, now flattened to a pink smear. The air above wobbles with heat shimmer. A caption might read, Day 3. Biomass removed, 78%. But the narrator instead whispers an Inuit adage in translation, when the meat is plenty, remember the hunger that brought you. As the scene fades, a researcher's voiceover begins cataloging the ripple effects. Whale fall nutrients leach into storm runoff. Fertilizing algae blooms that choke kelp forests. Reducing habitat for Arctic cod, seals' winter staple. Crowding bears trample permafrost turf. Releasing methane fumes, they overgraze crowberries, leaving Arctic foxes to scavenge seabird colonies, which in turn decline, loosening the cliffs where murres once nested, a cascade rendered invisible compared to the mesmerizing spectacle of 60 carnivores on one corpse. On screen, a juvenile bear tests the drone's boundary. He rears, swats at the whirring invader that never comes within 20 meters. The camera tilts to avoid teaching him curiosity. Porter overrides and lifts higher. Wind-strafed gulls screaming at the intrusion. Doroshenko marks the juvenile's ID, scar shape. Left ear nick, a future data point for stress habituation. Already some bears treat quadcopters as sparring partners. That adaptation sits uneasily between ingenuity and desperation. Before the segment ends, the drone sweeps seaward. A second, smaller carcass bobs half-submerged 200 meters out. Gulls pinwheeling above like white confetti. In its shadow, dark shapes churn, yet more bears. Swimming in frigid chop, claws raking expandable rafts of fat. The camera steadies. The numbers tick upward again, 67, 71. Distance compresses. Animal density appears to double every 9 pixels until the viewer's brain rebels at the scale. Porter murmurs, more to himself than to Doroshenko, it's not a gathering. It's an omen. She nods, taps transmit, and the footage begins its journey up to the ESA satellite net. Where somewhere south of the ice, policymakers and doom-scrollers alike will taste the metallic air of Wrangel through glass screens and wonder how many whales are left to wash ashore next year. The drone battery pings low. Porter initiates return to base. As the feed shrinks to a speck, the last frame lingers. A massive boar sprawled atop the whale's thorax. Chest heaving, face turned to the thin September sun. His eyes half close in what looks like satisfaction. But there's an edge of exhaustion in the slump of his shoulders. Everything about the tableau screams contradiction. Abundance underwritten by scarcity. A feast that predicts famine. A cemetery masquerading as banquet hall. Fade to twilight. A gust scatters the gulls. And the camera lens goes dark not because the day is done but because the story is only beginning. The fourth morning broke beneath pewter clouds that sagged low enough to graze the dolomite ridges, muting the beach into a monochrome tableau. The drone's battery packs struggled against the damp. Even their startup whine sounded reluctant. Still, Eli Porter launched the craft again. Because missing a single 12-hour window in a gathering like this would mean leaving blind spots in a dataset that might never repeat. Overnight, the bowhead carcass had collapsed further. where blubber once domed high enough for bears to climb like children on a hill. The rib cage now lay flattened, the vertebrae a row of mahogany stumps slick with marrow. But the crowd had grown. Porter counted 78 individual heat signatures. Then 80. Then 81 as a lone male crested a shale bank at the east end of the cove. That bear hesitated on the ridge, wind riffling the guard hairs along his shoulders. And the camera zoomed tight. He was gaunt, flanks caved, hip bones scabbed from weeks on stone beaches. The smell of fat must have been a siren so loud it cancelled caution. He descended. What followed was a lesson in the arithmetic of desperation. At first the newcomer waited, head hung low, nostrils working, taking the measure of the hierarchy. But hunger minted impatience. He stepped forward, edging between two juveniles that jumped clear. 10 meters from the rib ruins he met a mid-ranking male who wasn't inclined to yield. Both lowered their heads, jaws half open, lips peeled back to expose sabers of yellow ivory. The newcomer swatted once, twice. The resident lunged. Their bodies collided with a crack like a rifle shot. Snow dust rose in a plume, quickly tinged pink as one claw scored flesh. Around them the tight carousel of feeding bears paused, as if the whole assembly had inhaled in sync. Then the challenger peeled away, limping, and the ring closed again, as though the brief duel had never happened. The drone mic picked up none of the guttural bass notes that rolled across the stones. But Porter saw Doroshenko flinch each time a roar shuddered through the real air. Later she would explain that Wrangel bears, forced into such proximity, developed a nuanced vocal scale, deep chesty pulses for claim, shorter snaps for warning. Even a rough chirrup she thought signaled subordinates promising not to contest. A linguistics for carnivores invented on the fly in the shadow of a whale tomb. By late afternoon wind veered northwest, and with it arrived a flotilla of new scavengers. Glaucous gulls had been squabbling since day one, but now young ivory gulls and even 2 wandering albatrosses spiraled down from cloud bases so low their wingbeats brushed mist. They threaded between bears, stabbing beaks into exposed lard. One gull misjudged a landing. A yearling's paw flashed and the bird vanished in a spray of feathers. The cub worried the limp body like a toy before gulping it whole. Skull first. Cannibal opportunism in miniature. Porter's camera shifted inland again at Doroshenko's request. She wanted a count of denless females gathering near reindeer lichen patches. The optics traced a scarp and found a scatter of foxes watching the bears with uncanny calm. Arctic foxes once subsisted on lemmings here, but meltwater influx had drowned burrow systems. Now the foxes waited for bear scraps, peels of hide, orphaned seal whiskers from other meals. Gull corpses. They paced a ragged semicircle. Blue coats just beginning to lighten for winter camo they might never need if snow failed to stick. That evening the team's base camp swelled. A small Zodiac bumped ashore carrying marine mammal pathologist Dr. Lars Pelletier and a freezer chest rigged with liquid nitrogen pods. Pelletier's mandate was blunt. Extract bone plugs from the bowhead and archive tissue before the bears rendered the corpse unrecognizable. The hope was to trace isotopic signatures back to feeding grounds, mapping bowhead migration changes that had brought so many carcasses into shipping lanes. But reaching the skeleton meant threading between predators. They waited until bears drifted into post-feeding torpor, bellies distended, blood glucose crashing. Then, with a tranquilizer rifle at the ready, Pelletier, Doroshenko, and 2 rangers skirted the shoreline. Above, the drone hovered on night vision. Every few meters Doroshenko clapped copper plates, sharp report to announce human presence. A trick she'd learned to keep curious juveniles at bay. Most twitched but stayed prone. One adolescent rose, sniffing, but a ranger fired a non-penetrating rubber slug into the gravel a meter ahead. The bear wheeled off. At the ribs Pelletier worked fast. The bones were slick, so he inserted a stainless ratchet, twisted out a core as big as a rolling pin. Steam boiled from the cut in the sub-freezing air, and fat crept up the tool in lazy rivulets. 2 minutes later they retreated, hearts jack-hammering as a half-sleeping male levered himself upright, nostrils flaring at the iron-rich smell of fresh exposure. Safely behind a boulder, Doroshenko watched him trundle to the ribcage, sniff the new wound as if puzzled some other bear had carved so clean. Then settled to gnaw. Back at camp, a sat link uploaded footage and fresh biometrics to central servers in Anchorage. Within an hour, an algorithm flagged an anomaly. Satellite thermal data suggested half a dozen more heat sources cresting the western saddle ridge, bears inbound. Doroshenko did the math. Tomorrow's count could break 100. She emailed the Russian Arctic National Park Authority requesting emergency helicopter overflight to deliver extra non-lethal deterrents. Response: denied. Rotor noise risked dispersing bears into nearby walrus haul-outs, causing stampede fatalities. The field team would remain alone with their phenomenon. Midway through the night, a storm crawled over the Chukchi. Snow fell in stinging crystalline needles, quickly layering the beach. The bears, stomachs full, let themselves be half-buried rather than burn calories relocating. By dawn, the cove resembled a prehistoric grave mural, whale ribs protruding like the cage of a Titanic. Bears mounded white over red-tinted snow. Porter launched the drone once more. The feed ghosted by flurries. On screen, only faint silhouettes moved, each exhale a smokestack plume. The whale's mass was down to perhaps 30% original weight. But something new caught Doroshenko's eye. Large dark stains spreading outward from the rib cavity, seeping through the snowpack. She magnified. Pink slurry. Yes, but also oily bronze slicks. The whale's internal lipids melting into sub-zero water, emulsifying with bacteria, generating what chemists had begun calling necroturf, a fatty substrate invasive microbes thrive on. 4 hours later, Doroshenko sampled beach runoff. Lab strips confirmed high counts of Clostridium botulinum spores, an emergent risk when bears defecate en masse near their own feeding sites. If the spores colonized seawater, scavenging marine birds could vector them to distant cliffs. Another domino. Evening of day 5. A fight buckled the uneasy truce. A massive boar, easily 6 feet at the shoulder, tried to drag an intact flipper away from the carcass. A mother with twin cubs blocked his path. He fainted, cuffed her across the muzzle, sending her sprawling. Cubs shrieked. In previous years she might have yielded, but starvation's calculus had sharpened. She lunged, teeth finding the loose skin of his neck. He roared, shook her off, then in fury snapped his jaws on the nearest cub. A single crunch silenced the whale. Porter's camera trembled. He muttered an oath. Cannibalism rates spike when seal prey falls, but seldom in front of this many witnesses. Yet no bear intervened. The mother retreated with her remaining cub. The boar consumed the flipper and half the dead cub before ambling back to the whale, muzzle redder than sunset. Doroshenko's nightly dispatch to Anchorage read more like a battlefield medic log than wildlife report. She proposed that high-density whale dumps might be preventing adult mortality in the short term but increasing cub losses through trample, disease, and cannibal pressure. Her final line: Wrangel colony appears in negative feedback spiral. Carcass events mask population crash by aggregating adults for tourists and drones. But net recruitment is likely less than 0.2 cub per adult female. By day 7, the beach stank sweet as fermenting apples. Gulls arrived in such numbers the sky turned peppered gray. The tide, swollen by onshore winds, undercut the whale's remains. Blubber slabs floated free, bobbing like rafts. Bears followed, wading chest deep to claim hunks drifting beyond reach. 2 subadults misjudged the current. The drone caught them threshing offshore, paws scrabbling for non-existent ice. One made it back, collapsing in the shallows to cough brine. The other drifted outward, head high at first, then lower, until a final wave hit him and he did not reappear. Doroshenko decided the formal study had crossed from observation into witness. Porter dismantled the drone pad. They would archive what data they had, thermal counts, aggression tallies, pathogen swabs, and publish under a title she drafted now. Hands shaking. Megafaunal bottlenecks on ice-free shores. The whale-bear convergence as terminal indicator of Arctic trophic collapse. The film's closing sequence returns to the ridge at sunset. Wind scours the snow, exposing coils of whale intestine frozen into arabesques. Gulls pick maggots from crevices between vertebrae. Bears lie scattered, too heavy to move fast, breath geysering as mercury dips. One by one they lift muzzles to the horizon, as if listening for the distant crack of forming ice that no longer comes in September. Maybe not even by Christmas. A final voice, calm but edged with fatigue, overlays the scene. When predators that once ruled a continent can fit inside a single camera frame. It is not a marvel, it is an elegy. The super courtship of bone and hunger on Wrangel is the kind of richness that flickers brightest before it gutters out. We film it because bearing witness is all that remains when intervention comes too late. The aerial shot ascends until the bears shrink to pale pebbles, the whale to a faint smudge, the beach to a crooked parenthesis in an ocean too dark, too warm, too empty. Then the screen fades to black, leaving only the hush of wind and the slow, metronomic beep of a drone battery gone cold. The carcass was gone by dawn of the 12th day. Tidal swell and 80-knot katabatic winds had lifted the final spine section and rolled it seaward like a macabre wheel. By the time Eli Porter sent up the last remaining drone, nothing remained on the gravel but a pale, fatty sheen and a scatter of fist-sized stones slick with oil. Yet more than 40 bears still ringed the site, drawn back out of habit, sniffing for a meal that had already dissolved into brine. At first they milled in restless confusion, muzzles tracing scent spirals across empty air. Then, one after another, they began to disperse, lone males climbing shale couloirs toward the island's desolate interior. Mothers urging gaunt yearlings west along the coast where rumor of another smaller whale carcass had drifted in on Ranger radio. The drone tracked the exodus until the battery's last bar flashed red. Porter let the feed run until the image stuttered and died, committing the panorama to memory. Bears treading single file paths into fog. Their tracks of transient calligraphy soon erased by spindrift. Down at base camp, Dr. Tatiana Doroshenko zipped shut the insulated case of samples, blood swab vials, bone cores, soil scoops alive with clostridial spores. The evidence weighed less than 2 kilos. Yet she felt as if she were strapping an entire biome to her back. Nearby, Lars Pelletier loaded the final data loggers, heart rate collars, fecal DNA tags, drone SD cards, into a crush-proof crate bound for the Chukotka mainland. Logistics chatter crackled on the satellite phone. A weather window of just 4 hours before a blocking low slammed shut. The team broke camp in near silence, each absorbed by the same bleak calculus. Even if every byte of data seeded 100 policy briefs. Would it matter fast enough? Porter lingered at the shoreline while the Zodiac's outboard warmed. He knelt where the whale's jawbone had rested and pressed gloved fingers into the gravel. Oil still wept upward, rainbowing the slush. In the hush he thought he heard a faint creak, ice forming on far breakers. Or was it wind threading through whale ribs now 3 meters underwater? Either way, it felt like the beach itself exhaled a tired breath carried from epochs that no longer fit the age. The trip across the strait was brutal. Sleet hammered the Zodiac hard enough to peel paint. Spindrift blurred horizon from sea. Halfway across, Doroshenko clicked on a handheld recorder and, above the engine scream, dictated a last field note. We witnessed a congregation of 87 polar bears on a single bowhead carcass. Baseline stress hormones remain elevated. 3 cannibal incidents confirmed. 1 drowning mortality. Unsexed juvenile. Necroturf bacteria established at shoreline transects. Immediate risk to fox and gull populations. Recommend closure of Wrangel East Cove to tourist overflights indefinitely and initiation of multi-species cholera surveillance. She clicked off, thumb hovering over the delete key. Tempted, but she let the file stand. Truth, no matter how bleak, was her only cargo. The mainland runway resembled a war zone of mud and melted permafrost. A twin-engine basilar waited with props sputtering. Its hold was already half full with crates of orphaned walrus pups evacuated from a die-off south of Cape Chukchi Cayman. One of the pilots scribbled, "Bear data. Do not freeze," on Doroshenko's case before sliding it among boxes that chirped with SEAL rescue telemetry. In Anchorage 2 days later, a conference hall buzzed beneath LED banners that read Global Arctic Synthesis Summit. Ministers, venture philanthropists, carbon offset brokers wiped fog from their glasses as Doroshenko queued behind Pelletier at the registration kiosk. On a bank of holoscreens, looping footage from Wrangel, 60 bears at the bowhead, played without audio. A silent spectacle drawing clusters of viewers. Some frowned, some filmed the feed on their phones, a few shook their heads. Faces alight with the thrill of apocalypse tourism. Doroshenko pushed past. She felt each step like trudging through wet sand. That afternoon she faced a semicircle of delegates. Behind her the footage ran again, this time with her narration. An ecological pressure cooker. Polar bears have shifted from seal specialization to whale scavenger guilds. Super-aggregations are not resilience, they are triage. A hand rose. Someone from a biotech startup proposing algae-derived supplementary feed for charismatic megafauna. Another floated a hologram of an autonomous barge able to tow fresh whale carcasses to remote beaches to relieve predation stress. Doroshenko's reply was a single sentence. We cannot deliver enough dead whales to substitute for an ocean of living ice. The room fell uncomfortably quiet. The hush broken only by the soft hiss of ventilation that smelled faintly of conference hall coffee and ozone. Later, in a smaller breakout panel, Doroshenko laid out 3 grim trajectories. If no winter sea ice formed in the next 5 years, Western Arctic polar bears would collapse below genetic viability. If carcass subsidies continued to lure bears into mega scavenger events, disease emergence could shave that timeline to 3. If international shipping tripled through the northern sea route as projected, whale strikes would rise, feeding bears but spiking lethal biocontaminant loads that would ricochet through seabird, fox, and even human coastal subsistence networks. Every solution pitched in this hall, she concluded, risks replacing an ecosystem with a feedlot. In the hallway afterward she collided with a journalist live-streaming hot takes. Dr. Doroshenko, he said, what's the one thing viewers should understand about seeing 80 bears on one carcass? She looked past him as if searching for the pale horizon inside a building of chrome. That you weren't watching a feast, she said. You were watching a funeral reception where the guests are hungry enough to gnaw the coffin. Her words went viral in 24 hours, accompanied by the drone's overhead still of crimson-splashed snow. #funeral feast trended for a weekend, sparking petitions, meme wars, even a street mural in Seattle, a bowhead ribcage painted as cathedral arches. Bears kneeling like penitent knights beneath. Sponsoring NGOs saw a spike in donations. But venture capital simply rerouted to adaptive tourism, pitching cruises to witness the next mega gathering live, with carbon offsets bundled into ticket price. Back in Anchorage, Doroshenko signed the chain of custody docks transferring samples to a cryo vault. She lingered as the technician slotted vials into vapor racks, each tube frosting over in the blinding cold. When he closed the lid, the thud echoed like the slam of a mausoleum door. She stepped outside into brittle night air. Above, faint auroras shredded themselves against high cirrus, a green barely visible through Sodium City glow. She rubbed her eyes, and for a moment the streetlights warped into the shape of bare silhouettes pacing a whale skeleton. She breathed until the illusion passed. In the documentary's closing montage, the audience sees time lapse of Wrangel across the next 6 weeks. Snowstorms bury the kill site. Then thaw rains expose it again, scattering vertebrae like giant dice. The bear count dwindles to single digits. Finally, ice rims begin to form far offshore, thin, rotten, but better than none. A lone female, ribs showing through her coat, steps onto the newborn floe, tests it, and lets the tide pull her north toward uncertain hunting grounds. The camera tracks her until fog devours both bear and ice. Fade to black, leaving only a coda of text. Wrangel Island, November 12, 2033. Total confirmed polar bear congregation, 87. Total bowhead biomass consumed, 93% in 7 days. Projected Arctic winter sea ice extent, record low. 3rd year running. A heartbeat's pause, then a final line, stark on the dark. If this is abundance, what will scarcity look like? No orchestral swell, no credits over slow-motion snowflakes, only the low, real sound captured by Porter's drone microphone the night the carcass disappeared, wind skating over empty ribs, gulls crying, and, somewhere at the edge of range, a single bear voicing a deep, hollow moan to a horizon that no longer answers back.